My name is Laura Lee Keishley, and I'm the Academic Director of the Masters of Arts in Dispute Resolution. I am also, as of August 25th, the Interim Chair of the Department of Communication, or how we fondly refer to me now as the I-Chair, which is completely appropriate given the theme for today's talk. It also gives me lots of opportunities to practice what I preach, working with faculty and staff and students on some of the issues that they have. So I welcome you to Wayne State today, and in particular, I welcome you to the 6th Annual Hank Marx Lecture in Dispute Resolution.
Thank you, Laura Lee. I'm really excited to be here, and I wanted to bring greetings. I'm on the National Organizing Committee for Conflict Resolution Day, which started in 2005. And last Thursday was Conflict Resolution Day of this year. And so we couldn't bring Colin on the exact day. So we're considering this an extension, Conflict Resolution Day extended. We had a very good year this year. We had a variety of activities around the world. A couple that I stuck out for me was in Baltimore schools, they had a peace walk where middle school students and elementary students, 700 of them, marched to a local park and went to activity stations and listened to jazz music and celebrated Conflict Resolution Day. We have a national poetry contest that's going on, and it ends November 1st. And right now New Jersey has the most submissions in terms of states, so Michigan is behind. If any of you are educators, there's still time. Other events that have happened, there was a meeting in Hawaii focusing on Agent Orange and the damage that was done by Agent Orange to the Vietnamese community that lives in Hawaii. And they had a film showing and then a dialogue session there. There was in San Diego, there was meeting with the Liberian women's movement, talking about what they've learned about women's empowerment, working around conflict resolution, and many, many, many more examples. In Asheville, North Carolina, they were giving cookies to court clerks for thanking them for referring mediation. It was called Court Cookies for Conflict Resolution. In Maryland, they have a bookmark contest for young people, conflict resolution bookmarks, and the stories go on and on. So we're extending Conflict Resolution Day officially till today. And so thank you for joining us on that. The other thing that's happening, I don't know if you can feel the electricity in the air, but it's Cyber Week, ODR Cyber Week. It's for 12 years now. People who are interested in online dispute resolution gather online to demonstrate new platforms, to have discussions, and it's happening this week. So we're lucky to have Colin. He's actually present at Cyber Week and here at the same time. He's moderating one of the forums on ethics in online dispute resolution. So if you've seen the program, you know that Colin is well known for his role as Director of Online Dispute Resolution for eBay and PayPal. And he's a leader in the field partly because of his book that he wrote in 2002, Online Dispute Resolution for Business with Josie Bass Press. And he has had a variety of other roles. He's at Stanford Law School. There's a Center for Internet and Law. I don't have that quite right. The Center for Internet and Society at Stanford Law School. He's a fellow there. And he's on the board of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution at UMass Amherst. So these are some of the headline things that he does that people know about him. But what pleases me is that I know him in other ways. And so I've had a chance over the years to get to know Colin. And there's a couple things. I want to say, first of all, I think he's a really good choice for the Marx lecture. So I'm glad you suspended disbelief and went for it. Because I think about the first Marx lecture that we had was on environmental dispute resolution. And Colin worked with an online public disputes project in Cambridge. That was one of the early using the internet to work on public disputes. We had political speakers, political leaders. Colin is working with the UNICITRAL, the UN Commission on Treaties. I'm going to get this wrong. It's about, let me read this one too. The United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. We're going to hear more about that, but Colin has been working to try to establish an international agreement around the resolution of e-commerce disputes globally. Talk about politics. So Colin has been working in that area. Also, we had Bob Ackerman speak in the legal field, and ODR, online dispute resolution, is because we don't know where the jurisdiction of the dispute is. Law is being challenged and transformed with the online world. So he touches on the environment, on politics, on law, and kind of brings us into the modern era. So I think he was a good choice, and I'm glad we're doing that. But where I got to know Colin was he was an undergraduate student at Haverford College. And they had a mediation program, a student collegiate mediation program. And I remember I was a graduate student finishing my PhD at Syracuse University at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. I'm saying that now because Colin has a way of doing things better than other people. He went to the Kennedy School of Government for his graduate work, so I've noticed that he excels. He was an undergraduate working at this peer mediation program, and he began to write about the issues about user control and about the extension of kind of law beyond the boundaries of like who runs these programs and who do they serve. So he was asking critical questions at a time when I was cheerleading for programs around the country. So he was raising the questions that we needed to be thinking about at that time. He wrote his thesis or his paper on creating a collegiate-based peer mediation program and made that freely available. We became involved in a group called NAME, the National Association for Mediation in Education, and we had a higher education committee. And so Colin was the student rep on that committee. And so we had a discussion list, an internet discussion list called CCRNet that we were contributing to. And Colin was involved with another one called Dispute Res, DisRes list, which was our competitor. So there was some good online kind of where's the right forum for these conversations to happen. He got a BA in Peace Studies at Haverford College and went on to serve in the Peace Corps for 2 years in Tria, in the Horn of Africa. Then he came back and got a master's degree from the Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government in Conflict Resolution and Technology. And what I think about as a professor now, and give me the podium and I start to feel professorly, but I think about Colin as the ideal kind of a student in my mind, because he took things that he was passionate about and found a way to find experience and get an education to build a platform to do his work. So for instance, as a seventh grader, middle schooler, he was running a discussion board out of his closet in Texas, a bulletin board system in the early days of the bulletin board world. So he went to school and discovered that he could focus on peace studies and conflict resolution, but he was also helping to resolve disputes that were happening in an online, it was a Unix VAX discussion board tool at Haverford. So the early days of the mainframe computers, he was finding a way to use those tools on campus. So then he was able to get an internship at the National Institute for Dispute Resolution, which was a group that was giving out large grants to focus on teaching and training in conflict resolution. And he was able to turn an internship into a job. So this is another skill that is perfect for students. He was able to convince them that he was needed and necessary, and he became an information specialist at NIDR. So that was pretty exciting. Then when he went on to Harvard, he was focusing on, there was a program there on, it was Consensus Institute. It was focusing on dealing with large-scale public disputes with multiple parties. And he was able to work with that program. I think he was involved in their newsletter at one point, and in developing this online public disputes project. So he was taking the things he's interested in, people, community building from his bulletin board days and applying them at this larger scale. He's scaling up, as they say. Then he also was going at night to the UMass Boston program in dispute resolution, focusing on this emergent field of conflict studies at the graduate level. There was a lot of activity going on. And so here again, Wayne State is a direct competitor with UMass Boston. So there was Colin out in front. Then he was interested in building community. He connected with a group called Mediate.com, which was called Internet Solutions, and they were building websites for mediators. And this was a very early community approach to kind of bringing mediation forward as a profession. And he was the general manager of this, which brought him close to people like John Healy, early goers in the internet community building field, and somehow managed to be having executive meetings in a yurt in Oregon that was wired to the internet. So it seems like he was again finding that sweet spot where he could do his work. As the internet bubble was heating up, he was riding the bubble. I remember seeing him at a conference he had a team of like 5 young men in suits, and they had a company called Online Resolution, and they were looking really fine, and they were, I guess, had a big payroll. And so it was the internet bubble was on the way up, and Colin was right there and doing it. He served as the co-founder, CEO, and then president of Online Resolution. I think that Colin has been a person who found opportunities and then used them as a platform to kind of build and to scale up. I do note that he has risen above the Mac versus PC operating system debate. As a Mac user, it's a very important topic for me. But I understand that what Colin's solution to this was that he decided to make the internet his operating system. And he's been doing a wonderful job at making the internet a friendly, user-friendly space. So I'm really pleased to introduce to you Colin Rule, who will be talking about peacemaking online.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that was the most incredible introduction I have ever had. That's terrifying. I had no, you remember everything, Bill. That's really, so Bill and I have known each other for 20 years. That's what blows me away. And yeah, I mean, we first met each other when I was an undergrad. The only reason why, Bill, you think that I'm an ideal student is because I've never been in one of your classes. So let's thank goodness for that. But Bill has been a friend and mentor all the way along. And when I first got involved with conflict resolution, as Bill mentioned, I was in higher ed, and I got involved with NAME, and I met Bill and a couple other people, and I thought, this is where I'm going to make my mark. And once I met Bill, I realized, oh my gosh, this guy's forgotten more about higher ed dispute resolution than I will ever know. So I think I need to make my mark elsewhere. But Bill, you were an early mentor for me, and you opened a lot of doors. So I feel like this is your life. I'm going to try not to break down in tears, but thank you for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. And I want to say, Sue, it's such an honor for me to be part of this lecture series. I mean, to see the incredible pantheon of speakers who have been here and to think I'm the latest in that chain, I'm going to do my best to try and live up to that high standard. But just from what I've learned about Hank over the past 48 hours, he sounds just like an incredible guy. And I would have loved to have gotten a chance to persuade him that this was worth his time and energy to learn more about. But I think, and also Laura Lee was telling me, following on Bernie's example, I will call myself a proud Marxist in the tradition of Hank Marx. So in the era of viral video, let's hope that doesn't get edited out if I ever run for Senate. And then you just see me on television saying, I am a proud Marxist. Well, that's the end of the campaign right there. But so it's great to be here. Let me, let's see, let me bring up the video here. Okay, unfortunately in Silicon Valley, PowerPoint is a crutch. I have to have it, I have to have it. So, but I think it's going to be good because a lot of things we're going to be talking about today are visual. And I think one of the things that I would say to Hank, I'm kind of framing this presentation in my head. If Hank was here, what would I say to him to convince him that this is the future? But the beauty of online dispute resolution is, in the early days, I remember going to dispute resolution conferences in the mid to late 90s and trying to explain to people the value of technology. So you have to we had a double sale. we had to sell dispute resolution and we had to sell technology. John Healy, who Bill mentioned, is a good friend of both of ours. I would sit with John Healy at a table and try and convince mediators that they should get email accounts. And I was explaining to them, this is what email is. It's like mail, but it goes over the computer. And people, the body language was always very interesting. They'd cross their arms and they'd go, that would never work. I'm like, well, no, I really think, this email thing, there's a lot, you don't have to cut down trees, it's instantaneous, and eventually we won over maybe 10, 20% of people. Okay, maybe I'll get an email account. But then people would grow from an email account into their first internet account, and then they see their first web page. And now, it's just amazing to think back 10, 15 years ago where we were and where we are now. Even just, I remember the first time I saw an LCD projector where you could take a computer and you could put it on a screen. My brain went, whoa, how is that going to change things? I remember the first time I saw a wireless laptop, wirelessly accessing the internet. Oh my gosh, how's that going to change things? And the beauty of it is, we're just at the beginning. All of the tools that we're playing with now, in 10 years, we're going to look back, they're going to seem laughably primitive. So, Dennis, I'm glad you're here, because I know we have at least one nerd in the audience. And I know we got Bill. There's probably a few more out there, so I might try and pick you out. But fundamentally, the amazing thing about this technology is now my mom uses an iPhone every day. She's telling me about apps, My kids, they go online and they play this game, Lord of the Rings Online, where they assume the personas of elves in Middle-earth, and they go run around and fight other elves and go on quests, and this is natural for them. They're what we call digital natives. They've been born into a digitally wired world. All of us here, we're digital immigrants. We came into this culture. It's not our first language to be so fluent with this technology. But if you look a little bit out in dispute resolution, you start to realize we're going to be working with parties. The disputants that are going to come to us asking for help, they're going to expect that they're going to be able to use these tools because it's going to be a seamless part of their lives. So we need to figure out, how does all this technology connect with the work that we're doing? So I'm going to convince Hank by the end of this lecture that this is something he should be interested in. So let me talk just briefly, the way I'd like to structure my remarks, and I'm really eager to make this more of a conversation. So if you have any questions, or if I use any acronyms you don't understand, please don't hesitate. Yeah, we got a mic. So we'll have questions at the end too. But particularly if you want to ask some clarifying questions, don't hesitate to interrupt me. But I'll talk sort of at a macro level about online dispute resolution, what's happened in the development of that part of the dispute resolution field. Then we can go into the eBay and PayPal case. Let me just ask, just to start out with, how many of you in the audience have bought something on eBay? Raise your hand. Ah, beautiful. I love that. How many of you have had a dispute on eBay or PayPal? All right, good. We've got 3 here. And I know Dennis was a seller, so you probably have lots of examples. So is that Heather in the back? Yep, you've had one. And I'm sorry, what's your name? Tama? Tana. Okay, great. Well, it's nice to meet the 3 of you. I'm eager to learn more. Maybe we could talk about your cases when you get up at the mic. I'm eager to ask now, but I know it's not going to get recorded for posterity. But it's very interesting to talk about individual cases, particularly from the seller side and from the buyer side. So I'm interested. So how many of you have made a payment with PayPal? This does my heart good. I did a presentation in Egypt once, and it was before an online dispute resolution. The UN has an online dispute resolution working group. I did a presentation in Cairo to a university class, and I said, how many people have bought something on eBay? No hands go up. How many people here know what eBay is? No hands go up. So I threw my presentation out and just said, okay, this is what eBay is. But everybody here has experience. And I think, again, that represents there's a certain penetration that these technologies have gotten into our lives. 10 years ago, nobody had heard of Google. Nobody had heard of Facebook. These resources didn't exist. And now they've come in and they've completely transformed the way that we interact with each other. So if you look at online dispute resolution, this area of the field is only about 10 years old. And when we first started out, it was about, let's take face-to-face dispute resolution and let's just put it online. Let's just use technology to enable the same work we do face-to-face, we'll just do it online. And the other presumption was, the closer we could get to replicating face-to-face interaction, the better. Because the ideal means of interacting between people is face-to-face. So technology, it can't get us all the way there, maybe it can get us halfway there. So we were just trying to replicate that. So you can see it was the use of information and communications technologies to help people resolve their disputes. That's what we originally defined ODR to be. And when I say information and communications technologies, that's not just the internet. I think synchronous face-to-face tools like this LCD projector is also, I think of as ODR. I think fax machines, I think video conferencing, audio conferencing, all these mobile devices, all of that fits into my definition of ODR. But what's happened over the last 10 years is we've started to see the perimeters of this field expand, and now we've redefined ODR to not just be about resolving disputes. It's much more about conflict transformation. It's about conflict management. And that's been happening in the dispute resolution field as well. Now we are the Association for Conflict Resolution as opposed to just dispute resolution. So, and what we see now in terms of who is using ODR, it's not just useful in e-commerce or transactional situations like what I do at eBay and PayPal. It's also useful in violent conflict. I've got a friend, Sanjana Hatotua in Sri Lanka, who's using these ODR tools and techniques to help manage what was formerly a civil war, but now it's a post-conflict situation. There are people who are using tools like Skype to do communication in intransigent ethnic conflicts, like between the Israelis and Palestinians. I know there are people who are creating dynamic juries online. There's a website in Israel called allrise.com, and they actually use online panels of jurors to resolve disputes. So the perimeters of what we do within ODR are constantly being expanded, and I think that's kind of what Bill was touching on before. So it's a very entrepreneurial and exciting time within the field. So I know many of you have probably already seen this, so I'm not going to dwell on it in at any length, but you know, when dispute resolution providers have to design a resolution process for their parties, they often have to think through what is the toolbox? What are the different kinds of mechanisms that I can draw from in fitting the forum to the fuss, as we say. So it may be that direct negotiation is the most appropriate way to resolve the dispute. So that's obviously the parties have complete control over the outcome and they have complete control over the process. And that goes all the way over to the opposite, which might be binding arbitration. More, you know, that's what this room was structured to do, a more judicial type resolution process, where the parties have no control over the process, and all of the decision-making authority is invested in a third party. So we're all pretty comfortable with this particular toolbox. But the interesting thing, and I'll skip over a slide and come back, in an online context, a system designer has a lot more power, in a sense, many more tools that they can draw on when they design the process that the parties will go through in order to reach agreement. And one of the things they can think about is the different kinds of communication appropriate to the parties. So online, pretty much, face-to-face, pretty much all communication is synchronous. It's in real time. That's what we're doing right now. If I ask you a question, you need to respond right now. But online, we have a whole palette of asynchronous communication options, like email, where I can send you a question, I can send you a statement, and the expectation is not that you have to respond immediately. You can read that statement and say, wow, I need to think about this, or I need to talk to somebody about this, or I need to do some research, or wow, I'm really angry right now. This is not the best mood for me to respond. I'm going to wait a little bit and let it cool down. How many times have you written an email in anger, and then you go, ooh, I probably shouldn't send that. Why don't I sit on this for 24 hours, and the next day, you know, you have a little bit of distance. And what we found in conflict resolution is that ability to communicate asynchronously is very, very powerful, and it introduces some very interesting dynamics into dispute resolution. And we can talk about that a little bit more. But the power of the written word actually turns out to be a fundamental difference in the way dispute resolution services can be delivered. And in many circumstances, parties prefer that kind of communication to synchronous face-to-face communication. Another issue is that oftentimes people say, well, should we go with a technology channel or should we go with a face-to-face channel? And in reality, our lives don't work that way. We don't decide, well, I'm only going to have an online friendship with you, and I'm only going to have a face-to-face friendship with you. What happens is these things work jointly. We're expanding the toolbox. We're expanding the ways we interact. So you may interact with your kids through instant messenger, and then you see them in person, and then you do a phone call when you go on a trip. Essentially, all of these things work in concert, and that's essentially the way these technologies apply as well. So let me take a slide back. As I mentioned, when we first started online dispute resolution, it was about the standard tools of face-to-face dispute resolution: negotiation, mediation, arbitration. But what we've seen is that online there are certain tools and techniques that are much more practical and in many respects far more effective than they would be face-to-face. One of those things is problem diagnosis. Now, how many of you out here have mediated a case? Raise your hand. Wow, okay, so I'm talking to some pretty savvy dispute resolvers here. How many of you have been in a face-to-face situation where the parties come together and the moment you meet them, that dispute is actually more than a year old? Quite a few, actually. So that, I think, is a very common experience for face-to-face dispute resolvers. You know, a good truism in conflict resolution is the earlier you can get involved with the dispute, the better. And in many face-to-face practitioner models, we only get access to the disputants to talk to them after that dispute has gone on long enough to reach a point of impasse. Those parties are really hurting. And that's the point at which they say, I think we need to find somebody else to come help us. I remember when I was doing small claims mediation in Massachusetts, I had a dispute between a dry cleaner and a customer of the dry cleaner. And that woman had brought in her favorite coat and given it to the dry cleaner. And when it was returned a couple days later, the belt was missing. So she was upset because it was her favorite coat and they didn't stock it anymore. And the dry cleaner offered her 10, 15 bucks to go get a new belt. She wasn't happy with that. Anyway, they didn't reach agreement on that basic dispute. So she was so upset with the interaction, she started to write a letter every day about how horrible this dry cleaner was and how no one should, and she would tape it to his door when she walked past before he opened. So every day this guy would show up and he would have a letter there and he was at wit's end because she was torturing him every day because she was so upset about this. This went on for months and months and months. And by the time they finally got to me, when I was doing small claims, they were ready to kill each other. She was asking for thousands of dollars in damages. This guy had like gray circles under his eyes because he didn't know how to talk this woman down from her anger. But it wasn't about the initial dispute. It was all of the things that had happened afterwards. And as face-to-face practitioners, we often don't get access to disputes until they reach that point, and then you have to spend so much time getting back to the core issue. And even if you can work the issue out of the belt, it's not about the belt anymore. Well, online, these technologies have permeated our lives. We have phones in our pockets all the time. We check email all the time. And what that means is we actually can get access to these disputes before they're even disputes. In the eBay and PayPal context, oftentimes buyers start to have a sense of anxiety. Should I be worried? I sent my money, I haven't gotten my item. Well, they actually come and they can use our online processes at that point when they're still trying to diagnose whether or not they actually have a dispute. And that is an enormously powerful thing in conflict resolution. So problem diagnosis has turned out to be very rich. Another one is direct negotiation, and we call this assisted negotiation. The real father of online dispute resolution is a professor from UMass Amherst, a guy named Ethan Katch. And Ethan came up with the idea of the fourth party, where we know about party one and party two, those are the disputants. And the third party is often the mediator or the arbitrator, the live mediator or arbitrator. Ethan and Janet came up with this idea, Janet Rifkin, who's another professor at UMass. They came up with the idea of technology as a fourth party. It's almost like technology is sitting there at the table with the parties. And there are some things that technology can do to assist people in trying to get resolution that a live mediator or arbitrator can't do for ethical reasons or just because it's ill-advised. So we've actually found at eBay and PayPal that that stage, that technology-assisted negotiation stage, is enormously powerful. We do at eBay and PayPal every year 60 million disputes in 16 different languages. Now that number is far in excess of the US court system. It might be in excess of all court systems combined around the world. And that number is still growing. Now we only have 15,000 employees at eBay and PayPal. If every single one of those employees was focused on resolving disputes manually, we couldn't even get halfway through that volume in a year. And then we'd continue to fall behind every single day. So what did we have to do? We have to write software programs that can work at that level of volume to help people resolve their problems. And we've actually gotten to a point at eBay and PayPal where 90% of those cases can be worked out only in those first two stages, problem diagnosis and direct negotiation. And no live person needs to work with those cases. It's only the exceptions, that last 10%, that actually go to a live person that needs to work with them. So we also have online mediation. And I think that the face-to-face dispute resolution field spends a lot of time talking about the mediation model. And mediation is a wonderful, wonderful model for helping people resolve their disputes. Online, there's not been a lot of successful models for online mediation that have proven to have legs. We can talk about why that is. But online, parties are usually very focused on getting a quick resolution. We found at eBay and PayPal, people are more interested in getting a quick answer than quote-unquote winning. So our buyers would rather have an answer to their problem within a couple days and get a negative answer, than to wait 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then find out that they've won. So mediation often is not as practical online as it is face-to-face. And evaluation is essentially the bookend, because every process can be resolved in an evaluation model. So we can talk about, and I note how I say evaluation as opposed to arbitration, and that's an important distinction. But we've seen a lot of evolution in these models over time, and I'm sure that's going to continue as we move forward. So I've already talked about that. So let me just sort of to close out the discussion of ODR at a macro level, and then we can get into the eBay and PayPal case. When you look online at the types of disputes that are arising, I can buy something tomorrow from a seller in Buenos Aires, and the server that I use to purchase that item may be in Berlin, and it may be shipped out of a drop shipper's office in Hong Kong. So, we have a lot of, how many people in the audience are lawyers? Well, we have a smattering of lawyers. But, think about the legal issues surrounding these transactions. First of all, the value of that transaction may be about $100. All right, so your average law firm, if you go in there and say, hey, will you help me figure out, I bought an item from a seller in Buenos Aires off a server in Berlin, and it's a $100 item, so I'm willing to pay you $25. You're going to help me work this out? Probably not. And if you're admitted to the bar here in Michigan, and you provide legal advice to somebody in Wisconsin, well, you're risking disbarment. There are very strict legal ethics rules around which geographies you can practice in. Well, the internet doesn't care about Wisconsin versus Michigan. The internet doesn't care about even United States versus Canada. The internet is creating a frictionless global marketplace. So if you look at the way our justice system works, which is tied to geography, which is tied to physical enforcement, where you can go arrest someone and you can put them in jail, all of those models kind of break down when you start to think about this new global cyber-spaced interaction that we're building. So what does that mean? How are we going to provide redress in those environments? Because more and more commerce is being conducted online. More and more people, they're digitizing their lives. A larger portion of their lives is taking place in this virtual space. So online dispute resolution, or dispute resolution writ large, is a much better fit with the needs of those types of transactions. And that's really what's driving the work that's currently happening at UNCITRAL that Bill mentioned, and that I want to provide some more detail on. So, any questions about this? I know that was kind of a quick survey, and what I'd like to do is dive into the eBay and PayPal case. All right, why don't we plow ahead, and you can save your questions, write them down so you don't forget them, and then we can do it at the Q&A period. But let me now make this a little bit more concrete by explaining what it means in the eBay and PayPal context. Now, first of all, eBay's big, and I knew that before I got to eBay. But eBay's a lot bigger than it was when I joined eBay 7 years ago. So it's getting bigger all the time. But if you look at the number of users at eBay, it's about 240, 250 million users. Do you know what feedback is? I think most people bought on eBay. So a feedback is where a transaction partner can leave essentially a rating of their partner. The buyer can leave a rating for their seller and say how well that seller performed. We've had more than 4 billion feedbacks left on eBay and PayPal. And this is a 2008 statistic, but we sell more than 1 billion items per year. eBay does more volume on a daily basis than the NASDAQ. So, and it's a truly global site. The United States is a huge site for us. Canada is a huge site, but we also are very large in Korea. We're very large in Australia, very large in Germany. Essentially, most major developed countries around the world have an eBay site, and they're part of the eBay marketplace. So if you count up all of our users as citizens, we'd be the 5th largest country in the world. Now that's an impressive statistic, but I was on a panel with Facebook, and Facebook has 450 million users, and they had the same statistic in their presentation, but they're the 3rd largest country in the world. So I felt a little inadequate. So mental note, do not use this statistic if on a panel with Facebook. So I'll leave that there. But Skype, which is another company that eBay owned for a while, although we recently sold it. How many people here have used Skype to communicate? Wow, you guys are a wired crowd. So Skype is a free application, lets you make phone calls all over the world. Skype has about 450 million users as well. But the interesting thing about Skype is Skype's value proposition is far more valuable in the developing world. So Skype's users are disproportionately in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, whereas most of eBay and PayPal's users are in the developed world. So there's not a lot of overlap between those groups. So that we're talking about huge numbers of users, huge communities. And oftentimes I feel like I'm building a civil justice system for this country. That's a way to think about the challenges that we wrestle with. Now, that you also need a criminal justice system. So it's not like my piece is the only piece of the puzzle. And you heard in embarrassing detail about my whole professional career from Bill. So you know that I was not on track to work at a large corporate environment like eBay. It was a surprise to me when I got the phone call. But one of the reasons why I was convinced to work at eBay is because eBay is really unique. Occasionally I'll get a buyer leave a voicemail on my phone that says, has eBay sent the item out from the eBay warehouse yet? Because I haven't gotten it. And I have to call them back and say, let me walk you through the eBay business model. There is no eBay warehouse. eBay does not sell any items. eBay never even sees your item. eBay is merely, it's like a giant bulletin board, to use the terminology of my early online days, where people can list items and people can say, ooh, I want that. And it happens at such a scale that it's difficult for people to wrap their brains around it. But eBay is, in essence, a third party. eBay is a neutral third party to these transactions. And I thought, wow, eBay is perfectly positioned to provide dispute resolution. Well, turns out, not so much. People do not see eBay as a neutral player in their businesses. And I'm sure Dennis can speak to this too. If you're a seller on eBay, eBay kind of holds your fate in their hands. And eBay's making decisions all the time about your fate. Should your account be limited for questionable activity? Should you be promoted on the homepage? So eBay is not perfectly positioned to provide neutral dispute resolution services. And when I first arrived at eBay, eBay saw itself as the referee. So if a dispute came in, tweet, blow the whistle, send the parties to the two corners, and then engage in shuttle communication between them. But actually, that model cannot scale to the 60 million number that we're currently at. So I tried to make eBay more of a convener. The buyer and the seller are the only people that have actually seen those items. And oftentimes they have so much expertise in the item that it's not appropriate for eBay or our customer service representatives to be rendering decisions about the appropriate outcome to disputes that arise. I had a dispute over a comic book, a Spider-Man collectible comic book that these two guys were expert comic book dealers, and this comic book had sold for $13,000. And the question was, is this a blue-rated comic book, or is this a purple-rated comic book? And the difference between those two ratings is one blunted corner on the comic book, or one crack in the binding. No one reads these things, they're all sealed in plastic. But I am not the right person to act as an arbitrator in this case. I love comic books, but I don't understand them on that level. These two guys were the only people that had actually seen the comic book. So if eBay can convene a conversation between these two and they work it out themselves, that's the optimal outcome. So, now, one of the things I'm proudest about my time at eBay is changing the way people think about these issues. When I first arrived at eBay, a major problem on the site, or a major issue on the site, is where a seller lists an item, and a buyer bids on that item, and the buyer ends up winning that item, but the buyer doesn't follow through and pay for that item. Now, before I arrived at eBay, the name of the process that was used to address that situation was called the deadbeat bidder process. Yeah, everyone goes, oh. Yeah, from a dispute resolution perspective, not the ideal title, because the title of the process tells you who is wrong, essentially. The bidder is wrong. Not only that, it insults the bidder by calling them a deadbeat. So not really the best way to get the buyer into the frame of mind to maybe resolve that issue. So what did we do? It was marginally improved before I arrived. It changed from the deadbeat bidder process to the non-paying bidder process. But if you look back to your Getting the Yes with Fisher and Urey, they say focus on the problem, not on the person. So we renamed the process, so now it's the unpaid item process, or there's unpaid item disputes. Now, that's a solvable problem. Okay, this item is unpaid, well, let's get it paid. What can we do in order to get that item paid? Another one, the other process, which was buyer-initiated, was called the quote-unquote fraud alert process. Again, not an ideal way to frame that process for a buyer, because the buyer, oh my gosh, fraud, it's a fraud alert, alert, alert. It puts zero to panic. That's the way that process worked. So what do? We call it the item not received process. All right, we can get that item. Where is the item? Is it en route? Is it going to be received? All right, then the item is received, problem is solved. So if you look on the site, the word dispute was never used at eBay prior to the initiation of some of these processes. Dispute is a very important word because it implies responsibility is on the parties to work out that case. And they had the ability to resolve that dispute. And also, some disputes are caused by misunderstandings. If you have a complaint, if you have an alert, I mean, I can complain about anything. My shoes are too tight, you know, it's too cold outside. It doesn't imply that I have responsibility for it. It may be that I'm implying that someone else needs to take care of that for me. So you can look on the site now, and there's lots of this content. Presume good faith from the other side. Avoid threats and insults. The other thing that's interesting is we had to localize this in 16 different languages. And in many of these countries, they don't have as robust dispute resolution as we do here in North America. So it was translated into Chinese. It was translated into French and Spanish. We actually had a situation when this exact page was translated into Italian, because one of the things here is look for win-win solutions. And the person, the localization agent, wrote me back and said, what does this mean, win-win? I said, well, you know, it's where both sides win. She said, that doesn't mean anything in Italian. You can't say that in Italy. The other thing is, the way this was phrased, from her perspective, Italians would go crazy if you talk to them this way, because it sounds very belittling. It sounds like the way a kindergarten teacher would speak to her students. So she said, you got to rephrase the whole thing. So we actually brought in ADR Center, which is a dispute resolution organization in Rome, and they completely rewrote these tips. That it has the same content, but it's much more, these are the expert tips. These are the best practices. Savvy sellers know this is the way to work to get the most success. So again, the way people communicate, the way people resolve disputes is very culturally bound. So a lot of these concepts were introduced. Technology was the engine that brought some of those concepts to many of these communities. So I'm very proud of that. But let's actually go through the PayPal process step by step. Okay, and I know I'm overly ambitious in terms of all the things that I want to cover with you also. And let me just say for the record, I do not encourage any of you to go out and file false disputes just so you can view the glory of the processes that I have built on eBay and PayPal. I will send you screenshots. Do not start filing false disputes against your sellers. Thank you. That's my legal disclaimer. But you can see every PayPal user, every eBay user, they have access to a resolution center. And the resolution center is the hub that that hosts all of the problems that are in the process of being resolved. So this actually is the buyer view of the resolution center. Now, 90+% of disputes that are filed on PayPal are filed by buyers who only file one dispute that year. And let me also be clear that the vast majority of buyers on PayPal file 0 disputes a year. It's a very small number of buyers that file even 2 disputes a year, and a tiny, tiny percentage of buyers that file 3 or more. So we wanted to build a resolution center that was aimed directly at those users that don't go through this process very frequently. So they need a lot of guidance to figure out, what do I do? And you can see there's a lot of help content, there's a lot of tips, there's a big orange call to action button. And when a buyer clicks that button, we say, okay, what kind of issue is it that you need to get resolved? Is it related to an item that you purchased, or did you come in and look at your payments and you saw a payment there that you didn't make? Now, that latter case is not a dispute situation. That's a fraud situation, because someone has compromised that person's account. How many people have received an email from someone pretending to be from PayPal, but it's not actually from PayPal? Okay, a couple of you. This used to be a bigger problem a while ago, but fortunately we've been able to do some things in conjunction with Yahoo Mail and Gmail to deal with some of those, what they call spoof emails. But if your account's compromised, we need to take you through a process to change your password and take that liability off of your ledger of payments. But I'm going to take you through the item dispute flow, because that's where there actually is disagreements between 2 users. So the first thing we say is, okay, which payment are we talking about? And based on where you come from our platform, we may be able to pre-populate this field. So we know you're talking about this transaction, so we can, but if you come in from a help page or something, you can click that button and figure out what the payment is. Now this is very interesting. We call this the curtain page. And this gets to the problem diagnosis piece that I was talking to you about. Once we know that payment ID, we as PayPal and as eBay, because a lot of the eBay information is also available to this platform, we know a lot about that. We know about you. We know your account history. We know the seller. We know the seller's account history. We know the description of the item that you purchased. We know the amount of shipping. We know the location of the 2 parties, so we know where the shipment's going to come from, and we can make an estimate of how long that's going to take. We know lots and lots of information about this transaction, and we can actually provide dynamically advice based on when the buyer is filing and the type of item purchased directly on this page. So this page is just one example, but that top paragraph changes quite a bit based on the specifics, and there's a lot of advice. Now, if your seller was to communicate some of these messages to you, you might be skeptical, because the seller has a financial interest in you not filing a dispute. But when you receive it from a neutral third party, like PayPal or eBay, that has a relationship with both sides, it's more likely that the buyer will trust that information because they know that it comes from a third-party source. Now you can see in that box, we actually give sellers the ability to put in a message to the buyer, not to this individual buyer, but to any buyer that might file a dispute against that seller. And they can change that message anytime. So it can say, look, I'm so sorry that you feel you have an issue. Here's my email, here's my phone number. I take the satisfaction of my buyers very seriously. Please, let's resolve this. And if there's a weather event, if there's a blizzard, somebody can come in here and say, I'm so sorry, there's a blizzard, my shipments are going to be delayed, but everything's going to get out by Monday. You can change that message dynamically. The other thing that we do is we integrate very closely with shipping websites. So we actually enable sellers to buy shipping labels on our PayPal website. And then we automatically get delivery confirmation, tracking information for each of those shipments. So if a buyer comes in and says, hey, I didn't get my item, we can go out, we can use that tracking number that we have for the seller, we can go to the FedEx website or the USPS website or UPS, get the updated tracking information and display it right on this page. And it says, hey, you haven't gotten the item, but it's in Chattanooga today, and it should be at your doorstep in 2 days. I joke that more disputes are resolved with that shipping and tracking information than my entire dispute flow here, because that's often the #1 problem we have reported on a percentage basis from buyers is I didn't get my item. And the #1 resolution to that problem on a percentage basis is the item arrives. So a lot of this is dealing with expectations, is setting reasonable expectations. That's what I mean about the diagnosis phase. But if the buyer goes through this whole page and they look at all that information and they say, you know what, I still do have an issue, and I know that this is a real issue, it's a real dispute, then they can click on the bottom and say either it's an INR case, an item not received case, or it's an item not as described case. We call those SNADs, significantly not as described cases. And those are much more complicated. Item not received, we got to figure out, can the seller prove that it was delivered to the buyer? An item not as described, that's far more based on opinion, and it's much more complex. So we can talk about that. So when you go back to your resolution center after you filed it, you see your cases there. And again, for buyers, you're only going to see 1 or 2 because buyers don't, unless you're a professional buyer who's buying at significant volume because they want to resell, you're probably only going to see 1 or 2 cases here. Now, if you're a seller, we give you a different view of the resolution center, and we give you a whole separate group of tools that let you take batch actions, that let you sort all your cases. Because sellers may be selling thousands of items a month, so they need a completely different interface. And it's much more action-oriented as opposed to help-oriented. So then once that dispute phase begins, buyer and seller can communicate with each other directly on the platform. They can negotiate a partial refund. Say I buy a laptop and it arrives, but it doesn't have a power adapter. I don't want to return the laptop to get all my money back. I just want $50 from the seller so that I can go out and buy a power adapter, because in the original listing it said it had a power adapter. So you can work out that amount. And if both sides agree, they click agree, we close the case, we move the money as appropriate. PayPal has enforcement power in these cases because we have the ability to move money based on the outcome achieved. So when a dispute is filed by a buyer, we freeze the funds in question in the seller's account. And then once an outcome is achieved, then we can move the funds appropriately. So either the buyer or the seller have the ability to escalate this dispute to a claim at any time. And when they escalate that dispute to a claim, what they're saying is, we can't work it out. We tried to work it out, we can't work it out. Now I want PayPal to render a decision in this case. Buyers have the ability to file a dispute within 45 days of payment. And once they file that dispute, they have 20 days to communicate in this back and forth process. And either the buyer or the seller have to escalate it to a claim. If neither side escalates it to a claim, then the case automatically closes. And then the money is unfrozen in the seller's account. And that's because a lot of times buyers file an item not received dispute, and then the item arrives. And then they don't tell us. They don't have any incentive to come back on the website and say, hey, PayPal, guess what? I got my item. They're satisfied, but they haven't worked it out. So this process, actually, unless they take that additional step of asking PayPal to decide, then the case automatically closes. We send a lot of notices to the buyer right before that 20 days expires. So that's essentially the way the PayPal process works. Any questions about that? Or people who have gone, so I saw a couple people had disputes. I saw Heather and Dennis, and there was the other. Now, are these PayPal disputes or are these eBay disputes? eBay? eBay? Well, eBay has a slightly different process. It used to be that essentially all eBay disputes were referred to PayPal because PayPal was where the money is moved. But now eBay has built a separate resolution process which is actually more independent of how the payment was made. So we can talk about some of those distinctions. But can I ask, were they item not received disputes or item not as described disputes? Yes. Item not as described. Okay, great. Maybe we could talk about that at the Q&A. I'm very curious to hear. Hopefully, was it a piece of apparel? Ceramic irons. Wow, okay, I definitely want to hear more about that. That sounds great. That sounds great. All right, so let me just dive. I've got a couple other things that I want to touch on, and then we can get to the Q&A. Because I'm very interested to hear about these cases, but also to talk about kind of the ramifications of this more broadly. But at eBay and PayPal, we often refer to our websites as kind of the walled garden. If you come into our walled garden, you must agree to our user agreement. And those rules govern the way people interact within this space, the eBay and PayPal space. So the beauty of that is we can provide a lot of trust and safety inside the area of our website. Now, that's not true on the broader internet. You do not have to sign a user agreement to use the broader internet. And now, merchants have set up websites all over the world. You can go, today, we can go out on the website and find a merchant in China and purchase an item from that merchant. They may have their own user agreement. The eBay and PayPal user agreement actually specifies that if you want to sue eBay or PayPal, you must abide by the laws of Santa Clara, California, Santa Clara County, California, because that's where eBay lives. Now, imagine, if you would, like we talked before about the complexity of these cross-border transactions, more and more people are transacting online for the convenience, for the selection, for the price. So e-commerce is growing like crazy. But if you go buy something at Walmart or you buy something at Target and you have a problem, we can go back to Walmart and you can say, hey, this is broken, this didn't work. Or, you know, hey, this didn't include a part in the box that I need in order to get it to work. And they'll probably take care of you. If they don't take care of you, we have a lot of other options. You can go to the Better Business Bureau. You can go to your local small claims court. You can do something to try and get redress for that transaction. Well, online, it's very clear that that kind of redress doesn't exist. And the US State Department actually put together a proposal to the Organization of American States. So that jar in the middle that says OAS, that means Organization of American States. And the original proposal was, let's build an extrajudicial resolution process that could be an opt-in mechanism where countries can agree to reciprocally enforce outcomes in low dollar value cases, like cross-border e-commerce type cases. So maybe these are only cases under 10,000 bucks. But what that would mean in this basic design is that if I'm a buyer in the US and I buy something from someone in Buenos Aires, I can actually file a case with my local consumer protection authority, and that will go up through this international mechanism and be communicated down to Argentina to an online dispute resolution provider locally in Buenos Aires that would then interact with that seller. And then a mechanism could be created through which the United States would work with buyers and sellers, and Argentina would work with buyers and sellers to provide some sort of reciprocal jurisdiction. Because many of these cases, these low dollar value, high volume cases, are completely, they're not served well by existing judicial mechanisms. So this proposal was made by the US State Department at the OAS, and the response was, why would we only do this for North and South America? So the United States government then took this to UNCITRAL, which is the UN agency that's responsible for harmonizing global trade law, and made this same proposal. And UNCITRAL has agreed that there's a lot of promise to this, and they've created a permanent working group focused on online dispute resolution. So the first meeting of that working group is taking place in Vienna this year in December. But actually, I'm leaving here and going to Vancouver for a preparatory meeting. And we're going to have representatives from 5 continents, people from the international commercial arbitration field, people from the consumer protection field, people from online dispute resolution. And we're going to talk about how can we build this system so that it can scale, so that it can provide some of the same levels of redress that are available within the walled garden, say, of an eBay or an Amazon or a Buy.com, but we'll be able to do that across transactions that are happening in many, many different platforms. So I'm eager to talk more about this and how it's structured, but we could easily go down that rabbit hole. So we can talk about that in the Q&A. The other thing that we've done, there are a lot of different kinds of transactions on eBay. I told you about unpaid item disputes. I told you about item not received, not as described disputes. We also have disputes over high dollar value items like cars. And we've had to build special resolution. eBay is the #1 seller of used cars in the United States. We do hundreds of thousands of transactions around used cars. So, you know, the average purchase price for a car is probably greater than $10,000. You want to build a different resolution process for that than you might use for a comic book or for a Beanie Baby. So we actually partnered with a third-party company. Actually, they're located in Waukesha, Wisconsin, DeMars and Associates. They built a platform for us called netneutrals.com, and they resolve automotive disputes through a documents-only arbitration process. And we can talk about how this works, but all of their arbitrators are ASE certified technicians. So if you get into the functioning of the car, you actually have a neutral that has expertise in that particular item. And we've talked about building some other panels that have specific expertise, particularly around counterfeit items or luxury goods. So that's another approach that we've taken. But this is the one that I think I'm probably the most excited about. And I mentioned before allrise.com in Israel. This is an experiment that we've launched at eBay called the Community Court. And the Community Court is currently live. It's been running actually since the end of 2007. So you can go to ebaycourt.com and check it out. But essentially what it does is if a dispute arises between a buyer and a seller, they can bring their case to the Community Court. They both have an opportunity to upload all their information, make their case, and then it goes to a randomly selected panel of eBay community members that have registered to serve as jurors in this platform. And those jurors are balanced between buyers and sellers. They review the information from both sides, and they render a decision. And then that decision is enforced by eBay customer support. So again, when we think about this model, the judicial model, here we are in the moot courtroom, online makes some innovation in this model possible that would not be possible otherwise. So we talk about the 12 angry men on the jury. It would be probably impractical, if not impossible, to have a jury of 500 or a jury of 1,000. But if you think about it, online, that's what we do every day. We have people all the time that are voting items up, voting items down. That's essentially the way that Google works. That's essentially the way that Yelp works. And there are a lot of websites that leverage that kind of crowdsourced approach. So this, in essence, is a crowdsourced justice approach. And over the past couple of years, we've learned a lot of things about how best to design this to minimize gameability and system bias and things like that. So we could talk about the community court a little bit more. We're launching more community courts. We just launched one for Marktplaats, which is the #1 e-commerce website in the Netherlands. And the interesting thing is, the Netherlands don't have a jury system. There's no juries in the Netherlands. So this concept here, we don't call it a community court, we call them community panels. But it works the same way, and it resonates with the Dutch expectation of justice as well. So Bill mentioned ADR Cyber Week. If this intrigues you at all, I urge you to log in. You can just check it out. If you go to Google and type in Cyber Week 2010, you'll see. But there's many discussions. We have hundreds and hundreds of people registered from all around the world. There's some very rich conversations going on there. And there's demonstrations of platforms. And I think Cyber Week's been going on for the last 12 years, something like that. We have a United Nations Online Dispute Resolution Working Group that's met for the last decade. The next meeting is happening in February in Chennai. But it's a very international group, and it talks about online dispute resolution ethics and systems design and best practices. So Cyber Week is a great entree to that. And I just mentioned this meeting that we're hosting. It's actually ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. They run domain names for the entire Internet. They actually administer their own online dispute resolution system called the UDRP, the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Protocol. And that's run for the last 10 plus years to resolve disputes around domain names. So they actually are hosting this meeting in Vancouver for us to talk about an e-commerce based resolution system that uses the same model that they use. But it is a global extrajudicial system to deliver redress in cases that don't currently have redress available to them with existing systems. So this is going to be very interesting too, and there's a website, ODR and Consumers 2010, if you want to learn more about that. So I guess the main takeaway, this is what I would say to Hank. I would say, you know, this is where humanity is moving. When I first started my first bulletin board back in my bedroom that Bill was talking about when I was in 7th grade, it was like ham radios. It was a tiny community of people that were experimenting with very primitive technology. But now it's amazing. If you look in the developing world, there are people that are using cell phones, very primitive analog cell phones from our perspective, but they're building very sophisticated systems to communicate information about prices in the market, or available jobs, or transferring money around the country. This technology has become democratized as it's become more powerful, and it's become it's penetrated our society on almost every level. And what that's driving is a real change in how we resolve disputes. Let me be clear, the power of technology to resolve disputes is dwarfed by the power of technology to generate new disputes. I have yet to have one political conversation on Facebook that generated any insight. It's all heat and no light. But that said, we need to be using these tools, and we need to come from the grounding that we have in face-to-face dispute resolution practice. We need to educate ourselves so that we can best meet the needs of our parties. And we shouldn't put the burden on our parties, on the disputants, to come to us and say, hey, can't we use technology this way or that way or the other way? I've had processes where I set up a conversation, a multi-party process, and the technology isn't there, so they create their own Facebook group. They create their own email distribution list, and it starts to circumvent the process that we designed because these technologies exist. So I guess what I'm saying is, applications are evolving. It's a very exciting time. We're still dealing with the ramifications of this. There's so much more research, so many more questions to be answered, but I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So some of the resources, we'll make this PowerPoint available so that you guys can check out these links. The main webpage for online dispute resolution is just odr.info. If you go there, you can find links to everything else that we've talked about today. And my email is crule@ebay.com. If you have any questions, I would love to answer them. I'm sure Bill would love to answer them as well. But that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. Well, I'll start with the end. Yes, there's many things that I'm doing that they should know about. The credit card resolution process is called the chargebacks process. And actually, it's very interesting. The reason why I moved from eBay to PayPal was because I came to the conclusion very early on that, that the resolution should live where enforcement lives. So one of the challenges that eBay deals with is you can pay for an eBay item many different ways, but the resolution that you need to provide to the users is contingent on each way that you pay. If someone sends cash in an envelope to a seller, it's very difficult to get that cash back. You know, once the seller spends it, there's no way that eBay can push a button and reverse the payment. So in the early days of ODR, we spent a lot of time talking about merchants, and we were trying to convince merchants that they need to set up these systems. The more recent way of thinking about it is we should focus on payments, because there's only a couple major payment networks that are used for the vast majority of payments around the world: the ACH banking network, the credit card process, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and then some internet payment mechanisms like PayPal. Now we're starting to see new mechanisms emerge which are mobile-based, and that's a very exciting area too. So the chargebacks process actually is a huge improvement over cash and checks. And the chargeback, it also is very good in terms of consumer protection. However, I'm sure Dennis has an opinion about this, merchants often find the chargeback process very frustrating, because what happens is a buyer that has a dispute, they go to their card issuer. So if my card is from Citibank, I call Citibank and say, hey, I never got my item. Now, Citibank probably doesn't have a relationship with that merchant. The merchant has a merchant bank someplace else. So Citibank does not have the ability to resolve that dispute with the merchant. All they do is say, well, did you talk to the merchant? Yeah, I talked to him. Okay, fine. And then they accept the chargeback, and then they put it through the network, which means the funds are immediately reversed from the merchant. So I think from a dispute resolution perspective, we could do a lot better than that. PayPal and American Express are closed networks, which means PayPal has a relationship with both the buyer and the seller. So we can do a lot more to resolve that dispute than the average Visa, MasterCard transaction. Amex, I don't know if you remember, they had a whole series of ads they did a couple years ago with John McEnroe and Ellen DeGeneres talking about, we have quick resolution. We can help you work out your problems very quickly. So they must have done a market study that said, hey, this is something that consumers are looking for. So I think there's huge opportunity there. And this UNCITRAL network that we're talking about, we want it to dovetail neatly into the chargeback mechanism as well. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions around exactly how that's going to happen. But I think your question's dead on. It's kind of where ODR is moving is to that space. So thank you. A lot of what we found, because we have so much volume at eBay and PayPal, is we need to be very clear with expectations prior to the transaction ever taking place. So one of the things that we say at PayPal is it is the seller's responsibility to prove that the buyer received the item, not just to prove that they shipped it. Because oftentimes sellers will come in and say, look, I have a receipt from the post office that said I sent a package to this zip code on this day, but there's many a slip twixt the cup and the lip. So it's the seller's responsibility not to prove just that they sent it, it's the seller's responsibility to prove that the buyer received it. And they have to pay an additional fee in order to get that delivery confirmation. Sometimes sellers may elect, look, I'm not going to pay for that delivery confirmation because I'm willing to take that exposure. And if the buyer says that they didn't receive it, that means within the PayPal rules, that seller is going to be liable for the amount of that purchase. So if you buy a $5 item, you may decide that paying an extra $1 for a delivery confirmation isn't worth it, but you just need to prepare yourself that if the buyer says that they didn't receive it, you're going to lose. Now we also have additional rules that say if the item is valued over $250, delivery confirmation alone is not adequate. You also need to have signature confirmation. And look, we have a lot of disputes. Like I said, the majority of buyer-related disputes deal with item receipt. And there's many things that can happen. You know, it could be delivered. Signature confirmation means that, you know, someone has to be there to actually sign. They're not just going to leave it on your doorstep. So, but there are cases where the delivery guy puts it on your mat and the neighbor comes and picks it up, or somebody takes it off your doorstep. And that's an honest situation where the seller says, look, I sent it, and the buyer said, hey, I didn't get it. So we have to work those cases out. And there may be some circumstances, particularly in the new eBay process, where eBay says, look, we know that you're a good buyer. We know that you're a good seller. You don't have a lot of claims. We're just going to cover you because these things happen. I know, goodness knows, I had an item sent to me, and I never got it. So I filed a dispute, and the seller said, well, I have delivery confirmation. And then I called my wife, and she said, oh, yeah, I got that. I put it in the garage. Like, oh, great. The director of dispute resolution is harassing sellers. But that's just the way these things go. So a lot of it is finding the piece of information that you can use as a decision rule that provides clarity to all transactions. In many senses, that kind of systems design is more important than building an efficient process on the back end. You need to get ahead of it. And there are plenty of examples of how we've learned things based on downstream disputes. We've changed the upstream process to gather information that helps us prevent them from ever occurring in the first place, because that's the ideal. So. That's an excellent question. First thing that I'll challenge you on is that these eBay disputes don't have emotion. Because I have read thousands and thousands of these dispute threads. Dennis, I don't know if you've had a different experience, but wow, there is emotion. I mean, you would be amazed. And there doesn't seem to be any correlation between dollar value and passion. Oftentimes it may be that there's an inverse correlation. I don't know why that is. But many people get and the other thing that's interesting online is that there are cultures that are emerging. This is one of the things that's happening in Cyber Week right now, which I think is a fascinating discussion. There are online cultures that are emerging around the way people communicate with each other and the way people dispute. A good example is, well, in terms of the eBay disputes, frequently people don't have a relationship, like you said. They're strangers. So, and there's very little rapport building in an eBay process. So I don't know who my counterparty is. So if you were to meet someone face-to-face, pretty much anyone in the world, you would shake their hand and say, hello, nice to meet you. You know, nice day. Where are you from? Did it take you a while to get here? None of that happens online. The first message from the buyer is almost always, where's my item? You know, I don't want to hang out with you. I don't want to learn about you. I don't want to have any human connection. There's a purely transactional relationship. Now, that may facilitate the resolution of these purely transactional disputes because fundamentally it comes down to where's my item? Am I going to get a refund? Something like that. when I first started Online Resolution, which was a company that I ran before I came to eBay, we avoided disputes that I felt there was a significant face-to-face relationship around, because we thought things like apologies, things like really difficult interpersonal communication, it was unlikely that that was going to happen online. So we really wanted to focus on these transactional disputes. Well, very quickly we started to have parties come back to us and say, no, 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 we want to do this online. Maybe it's a practical reason, like we don't live in the same place and we can't get together. But oftentimes people found that the online communication would change the nature of the communication in a positive way that helped things move towards resolution. We said at the beginning, no divorce disputes. We didn't want to deal with family issues at all. But actually, parties would come back and say, no, we want to use your platform. And online family mediation is actually becoming more common. Now, does it look like traditional family mediation? No. There's a great website called Our Family Wizard. And it's actually an online workbook for divorcing couples. It is a dispute resolution mechanism. Now, is it packaged as family mediation? No. But it is a structure through which parties that are in the process of divorcing can work through the division of assets and custody and who's going to pick up who where, and it asks lots of questions and provides mechanisms so that people can resolve those disputes on an ongoing basis. Now, it's not framed as a mediation. It's not framed as you have a dispute, come to this platform. In many ways, it's this problem diagnosis phase. It's this assisted negotiation phase. So it's preventing the existence of these disputes in the first place by providing a technological infrastructure that can facilitate that interaction. But I think your point is very well taken. And for many people, emotional online communication you feel like communicating through technology is dehumanizing. Like it takes away that connection that's so important. Many mediators tell me that. I don't want to work online because I feel like the human connection is so important. But if you look at the younger generation, they are very comfortable using these technologies for emotional communication. It has an intimacy that is not alienating to them. And they don't feel like communicating over instant message is an awkward fit with communicating about emotional things. In many respects, some research indicates that younger kids prefer to talk about difficult things in online environments because it's so hard for them to deal face-to-face with some of the emotions that arise. So again, I'm not arguing for better or for worse. I think that mediators should think about these tools as just options in the toolbox. Never should technology be pushed on parties who are not comfortable with it or who feel like it's a disconnect with the needs of their case. But increasingly, people are becoming more comfortable with this technology, and the parties are the ones that are driving the dispute resolution field in this direction, not dispute resolution providers. So, thank you very much for the question. Yes? Well, we do resolve every dispute. You can think of all of our processes kind of like a staircase. The problem diagnosis phase, the automated negotiation phase, going up to evaluation. Now, the evaluation phase resolves 100% of the cases that get there. So, yes, 100% of cases get a decision. But again, our goal is to resolve as much upstream as possible. The ideal outcome is for the parties to work it out amicably, and more ideal than that is for a dispute not to arise in the first place. So we do render decisions in all cases, but we evaluate our success at each stage. One of the beauties of online dispute resolution is we can see all the communications. We can look at all of our cases and we can see how many are resolving at each phase. We can see what are the issues that are causing these disputes, and are there things we can do upstream to clarify. For instance, we used to have a lot of disputes around returns, because returns can be very complicated. Do you have a restocking fee? Is it a return for a refund? Is it a return for a replacement? Is it a return for a store credit? There are a lot, and what is the window for returns? Is it no questions asked within 90 days, or is it as is no returns? So we had a lot of disputes around that. So what we did is we actually changed the sell your item flow, which is where a seller lists the item, to ask many more explicit questions about returns. And then when a buyer was looking at items to purchase, we surfaced that information. So they knew exactly what the return policy was going to be, and we saw our number of disputes regarding returns drop significantly. So we do resolve 100% of our cases, but we are constantly trying to work that mix to optimize the good outcomes that maximize satisfaction with the platform. Yeah, thank you. Well, we have customer service offices. eBay's customer service for North America is in Salt Lake City. PayPal is in Omaha. We also have customer service offices in Dublin, Ireland for PayPal, in Dryland in Germany for eBay, and then in Shanghai for both eBay and PayPal. So there are thousands and thousands of people that work in those offices. You know, PayPal has a phone number where you can call up PayPal in the US, and we get, you know, tens of thousands of phone calls every day. Now, I have one team, and the frontline team that receives those phone calls is called the Resolution Services Team, which is a bit of a misnomer because they're resolving lots of different kinds of issues, not just disputes between buyers and sellers. It may be, I forgot my password, or, you know, I don't recognize this payment. There are lots of issues that come in through there. But there's one sub-team called the Protection Services Team. And the Protection Services Team are the agents that actually render these decisions that we talk about in the evaluation phase. So we've given them a lot of tools to streamline that work. For instance, our integration with shipping makes it very easy for them to decide, did the seller submit delivery confirmation and was it adequate? So they don't have to manually work every single one of these cases. And in many cases, all the information they need to decide it is collected before they actually engage the case. So I would say on a global basis, we do have probably 1,000, 2,000 people that touch resolutions in one way or the other. And that's resolutions and protections, because eBay and PayPal spend millions and millions of dollars every year just covering buyers in circumstances where it may be a no-fault case, or the money's not there to reclaim from the seller. So, and we do have a lot of dispute resolution people that we've brought into that. Creighton University in Omaha has a dispute resolution master's program, and we actually have hired people out of that program to manage that team and do account management. I would love to see more people in the dispute resolution field think about, we had dinner last night with an alum of the program here who works at Nordstrom. Well, that's conflict resolution. I mean, we don't talk in the conflict resolution field about customer support that much, but if you think about how many people are working in customer support, and it's not just e-commerce related. I mean, we have eBay, we have Buy.com, we have Amazon.com, and then there's also Zappos and many other merchants like that. But we also have Comcast, we have American Airlines. I mean, any company that has a 1-800 number, there are issues that emerge, and the lessons of our field can really benefit that practice. So I think we owe it to ourselves to think a little bit more expansively about where the disputes really live. I mean, I think family dispute resolution, community dispute resolution, labor management, there are definitely disputes there, but I just think we need to be a little more expansive in our definition, and we'll realize there are many, many cases that we can engage and bring value to. So.
Questions?
Wow, that's a rich question. And I want to bring Bill up here too, because this is sort of a joint, that's a great synthesis question of my two lives, higher ed dispute resolution. You know, it's very interesting. Back in the day when I first started online resolution, I would go and I would give demos of the technology in various, you know, if we were all in a computer lab right now, we could do simulated disputes. You'd all have a computer and, you know, we could use the process. And I would go to law firms. Again, this was 10 years ago, so things have probably changed, but there were a lot of lawyers at these law firms who still didn't type, you know, like they would have their emails printed out every day, and then they would dictate their responses, and then the secretary would type them in at the end of the day. So I'd put the platform up on the computer, and you get a lot of this. Where do I click? I don't, you know, and then they would say, I don't get this. This is incredibly complicated. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, we're not going to be using this technology. Okay. And then I would go, immediately after that, I had an experience where I went from a law firm to a university, Bentley, outside in Boston, and I came in, and the class all had their laptops out. It wasn't even in a computer center. And I put up the website URL, and I said, okay, well, here's what we're going to be doing today. Let me show you how to do it. And then all of a sudden, I see posts appear. I'm like, wait a minute. And they had designed a new interface. They were uploading images. They were putting in links. And they were going, wow, this is great, you know. And then they were posting messages. They built a caucus space. I was like, wait a minute. You know, there's a caucus space over here. So it was just, to me, that was like, wow, that's the difference. There's a generational difference here. And I spent a lot of time just trying to sell law firms on the use of this technology, and I couldn't do it. But now, I think pretty much every law firm in the country understands that this is the future. I mean, how many people are still buying the books? I mean, you probably use them for taking pictures of your associates, you know, standing in front of the books. Nobody actually uses that anymore. It's all LexisNexis. And everybody, you know, now courts are slowly coming around. I mean, the law moves slowly. It's a deliberate thing. You know, it's kind of like turning an aircraft carrier around. You don't change it overnight. And we have e-filing and things like that, but the e-filing, fundamentally, it's just electronic versions of the same documents. They look exactly the same thing, they're just PDFs. So I think that there's going to be a real shift in these tools. Can I definitively say how that's going to work? No, I can't. I will say that we're experimenting with a lot of stuff in the eBay PayPal context. And in a sense, we have a leg up because all of the users of our platform have already self-selected as being comfortable with technology. They've already gone on to eBay and PayPal, they've signed up, they've got email accounts. So I understand if I'm running Visa or if I'm running a courthouse, I need to serve 100% of my constituents, and some of those people don't have computers. So it's not like I'm going to digitize everything, and then if somebody wants to file a case in small claims and they don't have a computer, well, sorry, no justice for you. But over time, what's going to happen, you know, they're getting rid of the yellow pages. Well, no, they're getting rid of the white pages because they still make money on the yellow pages, but they're getting rid of the white pages. Why is that? Well, because we all have switchboard.com and we all have our iPhones now, and you know, they essentially, we've met that need. So I would say, as somebody who's worked in higher ed dispute resolution, I do think that it is important to create these kind of online filing mechanisms to enable people to get access to some of the resources that are available to them within a campus community, maybe a little more on the problem diagnosis side. I know I mediated a lot of roommate disputes back in the day, and oftentimes communication impasse would occur where something happened that soured the people in a suite from communicating with each other, and then it's like neighbor disputes. It just gets worse and worse and worse, and every time somebody plays their music late, they don't talk about it, and they just get angrier, and then eventually it boils over. So, you know, online communication, particularly with this digital native generation, may be an opportunity to break some of those log jams a little bit earlier. You know, and I don't have any magic bullet, but I would be very, very interested, you know, Bill, I'm sure you have a lot of opinions about this too, about how technology can, and Bill's been at the cutting edge of this as well. So, but I would encourage experimentation, and I do think that the face-to-face world, particularly in higher ed, is starting to look more like the community I've been working with at eBay and PayPal for some time, where everybody is savvy with technology on some level. So Bill, do you want to respond to that?
I think a couple things is that rather than the face-to-face, it'll be the Facebook-to-Facebook, you know, resolution. And the things that I've been wishing we could build would be, you know how you have the websites that have report abuse, where there's something that a bad post or a spammer, where if we had systems in the university where you start to see something heating up, you could say report, you know, flame or keep an eye on this thread. That would be one thing to think about. Another would be there are things like, I think Google was doing this for a while, where after 2 a.m., if you're trying to send a message, it checks it for, you know, do you really want to send this? Are you drunk? And are you, you know, I forget, there's a funny name they gave it.
Google Goggles.
Google Goggles, right. So if you got your beer goggles on, it gives you a second try before you send off that bad
I think
message.
you have to solve a math problem before it sends it out. So they give you a math problem, and if you're drunk, you're not going to be able to solve it, so it holds off. So yeah.
So I'm thinking that it would work better in closed networks, you know, where we had control over the, you know, the type of communication that was going on. And also, I think that there's a lot of work being done now on framing of conversations by the kinds of questions that you're asked. So that, like, intake processes would be framing, you know, how confident, how would you rate the cooperation between you and the other side right now? And then why don't you think it's lower than that? And have them, you know, you're starting to shift them to thinking about, well, there are some things that have gone well between us. Or, so I think that we're going to have to start thinking about communication, the network being a tool for us to resolve those kinds of disputes.
Absolutely. You know, some of the things that you said just really rang a bell with me. I work with a community mediation center out in the Bay Area, and they're doing a lot of work with cyberbullying right now. And one of the things that they're talking about is conflict can follow kids online now, you know, like you can be harassed on your phone, you know, and there was a tragic situation with the kid that committed suicide because his roommate used a video camera to tape him in his dorm room. But the thing is, in the early days of technology, the thought was that everyone was going to lie online all the time, because it'd be so easy to log on and say, oh yeah, I sent you the check. I didn't send that check. You know, if you have to do that to someone face to face, it's hard to do. But online, everyone thought, well, they're going to misrepresent. Actually, what's happened is the exact opposite. And Facebook is a good example. Now we are far more honest online. We share online. This younger generation, some people would say overshare online. But such a huge portion of our lives occurs online that conflict, it lives there too. And I think that, you know, instilling some of the ethos of we're all responsible for each other. And, you know, a lot of what we did in higher ed was sort of having people think about, you know, hey, let's look out for each other. And if you see something going on, well, that needs to extend online as well. And a lot of times I think the older generation kind of looks at the activities of the younger generation online as a big black box. Oh, we don't know what's going on in there, so I hope it's not bad. But the fact is, it's not just a black box. There's a lot of social interaction that's going on there too. And I think being attuned to what's going on there and people's Facebook pages and messages being communicated back and forth, actually you can find disputes and you can find opportunities for dispute resolution there too. So I don't think we've totally figured out how to do that, but I think it's definitely where it needs to go. So.
Thank you, Colin.